This month, I'm real excited. This is really the first guest speaker we've ever tried to do virtually. So I think we're experimenting a little bit. We'll see how it all turns out. But welcome to DevOps for Defense for August 2020. Um, this month, as I mentioned, we've got a guest speaker from Dark Wolf Technologies. Uh, this is Tom Marlow, and he's going to talk to us about fast track and continuous ATO. So there's some really interesting stuff, and maybe a little. Well, I'll introduce him in just a second. Let's start with our code of conduct, as always. If you can go to the next chart. So as always, just remember, obviously this is an unclassified context. Please, no dirty words. Please treat each other with respect and professionalism. Don't talk about your secret sauce. Keep that to yourself. But do talk about your experiences and your needs and what you could do or could use to help you drive improvement in the work that we do for our warfighters. Please do share your thoughts and learn from others. One thing just that's sort of unique to the virtual experience, I would ask everyone to mute yourself if you're not speaking. We've all lived through it. That's pretty much a nightmare to deal with the background noise as a speaker. So let's respect Tom and keep ourselves muted when not speaking. And then I'm trying something new here. Zoom has this feature to allow you to record a presentation session. So we're going to record it. We do have a YouTube channel where we try to capture our presentations and make them available for later use or for the people who wanted to show up but couldn't make it. So if you are not comfortable with participating and being in that recording, I just ask you to either stay quiet or step away. Two things. Vadim is on. Vadim came earlier this year and talked to us about Shipt. Shipt is a company that does grocery delivery. I've actually used them a few times here recently in the COVID world. He talked to us about how his experience using DevOps to create and deploy capability at Shipt. And I've asked him to come out next month and do a talk on scaling. His experience at Shipt, and now he's with a new organization, and the challenges and the solutions that they have for dynamic scaling, taking advantage of that elasticity that's offered by the target environments that we're looking for our DevOps and DevSecOps execution. So I'm real excited about that. Vadim's last talk was great, and I think it'll be great next month. And I think it's also a topic that's really relevant for what we're doing. So with that, I'll take a second and just thank Tom Marlow for coming to speak to our group. Tom is with Dark Wolf Solutions. I'm in a position where I get people sending me, hey, did you see this publication? Did you see this thing? Did you see what the the CIO just sent out? Did you? And so you get to a place where you can I sort of collect things. And it's probably about a month ago, someone sent me the U.S. Air Force Continuous ATO playbook. And I thought, oh, this looks cool. Started going through and reading that, and it turns out a lot of the front matter is really talking about the challenges that we face in our environments, and some of the things we're trying to overcome and really achieve. And this document that Tom and his team published for the U.S. Air Force almost was talking to me. It was kind of like, it reminded me of I hope everyone's read the Phoenix Project, kind of the original Bible. It talked to me because it's like, oh my God, that's my life. Some of the challenges that this paper talked about was very much the same way, but a little bit more focused on our domain. And so I reached out to Tom and his team to ask if I could publish that document if it was approved for public release. And thankfully, yes, it is. So if you would like to read it, it's up on the website and the resources. You could download a copy and share it with people in your organization. And in Tom and his team also said, and oh, we see that you do the meetup. We would love to participate. And so I'm certainly never going to turn down an offer like that. So Tom, I want to thank you for taking your time and providing some material. And with that, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, JD. I appreciate that. So it's interesting. With the ATO playbook, we had worked with the Air Force on that. We too had questions, is this something that we could publish freely? Well, the Air Force actually issued an RFI on beta.sam.gov, which is the new Fed BizOps, a couple of months ago. And it was an RFI for support to a low-code software factory. So they had two documents that they published. One was the RFI itself, and the other, to our surprise and unbeknownst to us, was the ATO playbook. And we all got to get a good laugh when we opened it and flipped to the back page, and there was Rick's name and Wolf Den branding, which is where we were incubated before becoming Dark Wolf Solutions in January of 2019. So the Air Force has made it publicly available, and we're happy to share it. And this is a concept also that we're happy to talk to about with other companies, with other government agencies, not just the Air Force and DoD, but we're happy to really talk about this concept to help modernize ATO. Interestingly enough, I think this is the 5th talk I have given on continuous ATO and fast track ATO since the start of COVID. My 5th virtual talk. So this is a topic that's generating a lot of interest, and we're always happy to answer more questions. And the talk I'm going to give today is very high level. So, but with that said, my name is Tom Marlow. I'm the Deputy Director of Dark Wolf Cybersecurity Practice. Within our cybersecurity practice, we do lots of penetration testing, incident response. We do cybersecurity consulting, RMF support, and risk management framework consulting, as well as some social engineering, some Internet of Things hacking. We take drones apart, things of that nature, kind of whatever comes our way. Our largest customer is the U.S. Air Force currently, and we also do business at a couple of other federal agencies, and then we have a couple of commercial customers as well. Rick Tosavanian, our CEO, he founded Dark Wolf as a startup incubating within Wolf Den Solutions. We were Wolf Den Technical Services. We spun off in December of 2018. It was a completely amiable spinoff, always the plan, and we've been operating independently ever since then. So kind of getting into it and what sort of drove this whole idea of fast track ATO and continuous ATO. And this is a quote from Ms. Lauren Knossenberger. And she has been a real champion of transforming a lot of how the Air Force, develops its tools, develops its applications, how it uses technology, but also how it secures its technology. And she's actually the Chief Transformation Officer of the Air Force. And she observed that one of the problems that we have under traditional agile traditional waterfall software development methods, which this group is aware of, releases are every 6 months to longer. They could be up to a year, 2 years. And in terms of keeping up with our adversaries and the rate at which we need to update technology to remain competitive, that's simply too slow. There's a variety of factors behind that. But it's that observation that has really driven the Air Force's adoption and move towards DevSecOps, so that we can release capability to the warfighter on a much more frequent basis, similar to what all the big commercial guys do. However, we do have security as a major concern. If the systems are compromised, if they're hacked, then the capability that goes up to the warfighter is either seriously degraded or worse. So security is still important. And the framework in the government for that is the risk management framework. So what we worked on was a way to help us realize the rapid, deployments of capability to the field, while at the same time protecting information assets. And we'll get into how we do that. So to help us compare and contrast, I want to set the stage with the different types of authority to operate that we have. First, there is the traditional risk management framework and authority to operate. This goes back to the early 2000s when FSMA was first issued as a law. It's usually when a new system comes online or every 3 years, the system has to be accredited. And it takes a risk-based approach, and it's very methodical. It's very step-by-step. So it's comprehensive. The coverage is good. It considers a lot. It's done relatively well keeping up with technology when we get into mobile applications, web applications, things of that nature that were in their more nascent stages back in the early 2000s. The problem with the traditional RMF is that it was designed for waterfall software development, and it takes a really long time to get through. System accreditation efforts can take up to a year or more. Application accreditation efforts, the same. And then when you start talking about fielding other types of capabilities that aren't necessarily enterprise software, such as mobile devices, Internet of Things devices, or software that's embedded into hardware, the RMF is not necessarily a great fit for that, especially once you move it to a DevOps framework. So we needed a way to bring over the goodness of all that security, but at the same time, not hamstring the mission. So the ideas that we've been working on, the first is Fast Track ATO. Fast Track ATO helps streamline accreditation decisions. Its normal use case is when you have an accredited system transitioning from an accredited platform to another accredited platform. So think of lift and shift for something going from, whether it's a legacy network, a LAN, or whatever the case might be, to go and for hosting in the cloud, a cloud service provider like Amazon or GCP or Azure. What's nice about this is that at the authorizing official's discretion, which we'll get to, this encourages the authorizing official to accept the accreditations and the risk posture that was previously approved for that application as part of its previous accreditations, as well as to recognize that it's going to inherit the controls and the protections and the accreditation of the environment that it's going to. There's no need to recreate all of that paperwork. What most accreditation officials will do instead is request a penetration test of the system in its new CSP or its new environment. And that way, rather than going through a very time-consuming update of all of the materials, you instead take a look at its actual security. We attempt to hack it, we attempt to break into it. The deliverable from that is a penetration testing report. And accredited authorizing officials can use that report to decide whether or not this system should get its ATO. In those reports, we can go so far as when we list the vulnerabilities, we explain the reason for the vulnerability, and we recommend remediations. We'll also sometimes make a recommendation as to whether or not the system should be approved for operation. And we do that using a proprietary risk rating tool that we developed at Darkwolf that uses quantitative and qualitative factors to help business owners and accreditation officials understand how serious is this vulnerability really. With penetration testing reports, you can have cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, you may have privilege escalation, fuzzing is allowed, whatever the case might be. When you present that to more of a business type leader, they're gonna wonder, all right, well, what does that mean? And so we try to explain that in our reports so that they can arrive at a decision. What this has done for systems that qualify, when you take into account the government's work, as well as our work to perform the penetration test, for a system that's lifting and shifting essentially, you can usually complete the ATO process within about 3 to 4 months, depending on how motivated the government is to produce the artifacts that are needed, how fast the developers can produce artifacts. And a lot of the cases, it might be minor updates to system security plans and things of that nature. And really, rather than going through detailed control matrices, we're focusing on the penetration test and the results of the penetration test. Continuous ATO is a different use case. Continuous ATO was developed for DevSecOps software factories. And the main qualifier for continuous ATO is that you have DevSecOps, the software factory is adhering to certain best practices for security across a couple of different dimensions, which we'll get into, but that includes the people, the tools, the technology, the processes. And assuming that we can test those security controls, and that usually includes a penetration test and an adversarial assessment. It includes a cultural assessment. We accredit the factory, and when the factory is accredited, the product that comes off of the factory inherits the factory's accreditation. So what's nice about that is that, if you're building on an MVP, you're building on a system, you don't have to reaccredit and retest that every time you want to move a new update to production. Instead, you're going to inherit what's the factory. And for continuous monitoring purposes, what we might do is repeatedly test the factory, or on a sampling basis, test the applications that are coming off the factory to make sure that the factory's tests and controls are going into that application and that residual vulnerabilities aren't making it out into production. But that was really continuous ATO. It's by using that model, we can cut, we're then able to deliver on a much more frequent basis. It's not months or years. It can be weeks, days, or less, which is really nice. Oh, just as a quick note, when I'm in screen sharing mode on Zoom, I can't see chat. So feel free to ask questions. However, I won't be able to see them until I escape out of screen sharing mode. Anyways, this should be everyone's favorite diagram, the risk management framework. And again, it's a good comprehensive framework. You have the 6 steps of the risk management framework. The outer ring, you have all of the guidance that tells you how to get through each of those steps. We still want to be able to provide the same level of security that this does. However, as we'll get into it, the traditional artifacts for an ATO, there's actually discretion that the authorizing official has as to how much of this you're actually going to produce. But traditionally speaking, in general, to get to an accreditation or an ATO, you produce the system security plan, and that would include, the risk categorizations, responsible organizations, and just lots and lots of policy. Then there would be the control matrix, and these can be massive, especially if it's all multi-hundred control, 700, 800 controls from the risk management framework, NIST 800-53, and that number will grow if you have overlays that include HIPAA, privacy impact things, national security, PCI, whatever the case might be. Then there's the test report. The test report, which is still the key part, that can include not just the cybersecurity assessment, like a penetration test, but it may also include things like, an assessment of the culture, assessment of the policies, assessment of, for example, you only allow authorized users on your system. An authorized user is one that has filled out a form. That form has been through a routing process. It's been approved. So you test that. And that can also go in the test report. Lastly, there's the plans of action and milestones. And the POAMs are providing that list of vulnerabilities that are still open following the security assessment. And the POAM will lay out whether or not those vulnerabilities are going to be closed and by when, or are they going to be mitigated, or are they going to be left alone. One of the things that's important to keep in mind is that to get to an authority to operate, security doesn't have to be perfect. No one expects it to be. But if there are vulnerabilities, then there should be mitigations around those, whether it's monitoring log files for activities, changing configurations to actually remediate the vulnerability, or whatever the case might be. But these are the traditional building blocks to help you get to an ATO. And with fast track and especially continuous ATO, we start to play around with these a little bit.
Hey, Tom, there were a couple questions that came through, and I
Sure.
think they actually set you up well for some of the next set of content you got. But I'd like to just throw them out and
Sure.
prep you up or give you a chance to respond. First one was, could you provide an example of a software factory, and does the U.S. Air Force have one?
The Air Force actually has a couple. I would say, based on my observation, they are out front. So Air Force software factories include Kessel Run, Platform One, Bespin, which is actually in Montgomery, Alabama. And Bespin, Bespin's focused is a software factory for mobile applications. There's Rogue Blue at Stratcom. Tron, which is, I can't remember where Tron is. There's also Space Camp, Ski Camp, and I think one or two others I may not be thinking of offhand, but the Air Force has got them. They have different missions. They tackle different domains, whether it be enterprise software or mission software or software that's going to be embedded into hardware systems. We know that other government agencies are attempting to replicate that model. However, no one is quite as far ahead as the Air Force is.
Okay, great. And I think we're familiar with some of those, and have at least been able to reach out and touch base with some of them. So it's pretty cool to talk to those guys whenever you get an opportunity. Yep. The next one was really about your CI/CD pipeline. So we are now in our industry, we're starting to see contracts that require us to implement software factories per the DevSecOps reference design, right? That's becoming a contractual requirement. Yes. And so the question, I think, is in that context. It says, as you develop new features in your application, I found you have to evolve your CI/CD pipeline to handle these new features, new hardware, et cetera. How do you account for that when the pipeline is certified in continuous ATO?
So that may drive a need for new testing. And the best practice I've seen for this is what Darkwolf is actually, we're at most of those software factories that I mentioned. And at Platform One, we actually provide a red team. And the red team is continuously beating up on the pipeline. They're beating up on the infrastructure and they're beating up on the applications that come out of it. So we recognize that they are making changes. So rather than the ATO isn't necessarily for the snapshot of a specific configuration, more it's like a trying to think like a certification of risk tolerance. That is, so long as security is remaining within an accepted tolerance level, which the red team is constantly looking at, then that accreditation can proceed. So you have the freedom to tune and update and add new tools to your pipeline. All right.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Okay. All right, jumping into the Fast Track ATO background. This is just a little more detail on Fast Track ATO and kind of where it came from. But again, it's to provide an alternative pathway. Really, Fast Track ATO was born out of, do we have to do all of this paperwork to move an accredited application from an accredited system to an accredited system? And we've decided that, the Air Force has decided that that's just not value add. And that's the thing too, we recognize we don't want to skip security. We don't want to ignore security. It's critical. But the processes for ensuring security, again, go back almost 20 years. And so what we want to do instead is, how can we modernize this process? And so for both continuous ATO and Fast Track ATO, we derive our authority for doing this, in case anybody ever asks, from NIST 800-37 revision 2. 800-37 is almost the umbrella, the overall regulation, if you will, that sets up the entire risk management framework, six steps that you saw earlier. And it incorporates what was previously a supplemental guidance on ongoing authorization. Ongoing authorization was previously in revision 1, it was a supplement. Now it's a part of the overall part of it. Scott Van is requesting to take remote control of my screen. Oh, sorry. Decline. All right, no problem. It keeps asking.
My computer might be doing something weird.
Okay. All right, there we go. It's off. Okay, sorry. So based on that, and again, it's, a lot of this is going to be at the discretion of the authorizing official. If the authorizing official is willing to rely on a penetration test report as really the main piece, the main artifact for basing their decision, they can do that. However, if the authorizing official wants to go all the way back through the risk management framework process again for whatever reason, they can do that too. But for Fast Track ATO, we saw an opportunity to significantly reduce the time of the process, and so we're taking it. And it's been very successful. I think at Darkwolf, going back the 2.5 years roughly that we've been doing this for the Air Force, I think we've helped maybe somewhere between 10 and 15 systems get through the accreditation process. So it's definitely been a very popular option for those from whom it qualifies. Systems that may not qualify for Fast Track ATO, one of the cases that we typically see are brittle systems that even though they have an accreditation, a penetration test could break them very easily. And so we typically would not recommend a Fast Track ATO for that. These are systems that need to be resilient and flexible. But we have one case in particular, we just couldn't do it. The system had no development and test environment. It was prod only. And we just didn't want to take the risk of bringing it down.
Hey, Tom, let me ask a question on, we keep highlighting the criticality of the AO, and it's really about the AO and at the AO's discretion. Yes. So in conversations I've had with Level Up and Platform One, I asked them, what's your key lesson learned as you work through this process? And their feedback was, you really have to help your ATO understand the technology and the processes and how it works. And they recommended that we look for AOs with experience using these processes, employing the technologies. It sounds like you agree with that.
I do. It's for those. Oh, sorry.
I just said, have you seen that work, or do you know?
Yes. So we look for forward-leaning, so the more forward-leaning the AO is, and the ones that we've worked with at Air Force typically are forward-leaning, they want to get comfortable with this. What we would propose, and what we are doing now for our clients who, with two kinds of clients that we help with this. One are government organizations, such as Platform One themselves, get through the accreditation process. We also help businesses, for example, small businesses with SBIR awards who are new to doing business with the federal government. We'll advise them and help them get through the ATO process. Our first step in our plan and our approach is to first identify who the AO is, because sometimes that's not obvious and it can actually take some detective work to get to. And then secondly, once we do, try to get on that person's calendar so that we can brief them on the concept of, let them know the options, traditional, fast track, and continuous. And we may have a recommendation based on, the system itself and the programming processes and things of that nature. But to educate them on it, ask questions, and to see if we can, and if they are a candidate for fast track or continuous ATO, see if we can encourage them in this direction. We also do that because we want to build a roadmap during like the first 30 to, anywhere from the first 30 to 60 to 90 days of how are we going to get to ATO. And so understanding the AO's expectations is key to building that roadmap. And so that's how we go about doing that. So far, everyone we've interacted with has been forward-leaning and have been willing to go down the continuous ATO or fast-track ATO approach.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. What's also nice at Air Force, and I think sets up a model for other agencies, is that fast-track ATO has been enshrined into policy by the Air Force. And so here on 18 March 2019, the Deputy CIO of the Air Force signed the fast-track memorandum. It recognized that the RMF is resource intensive. It takes a long time. It doesn't necessarily give you better security. I remember a long time ago when the OPM hack happened, I saw a comic somewhere where two other federal government system administrators were looking at each other, reading about the OPM hack, and the quote underneath was, well, didn't they have all their FSMA paperwork in order? So that's what we're trying to protect against, essentially. And so I think that's what this memo is getting at as well. So the memo also gives a fast track overview. There's a sample decision brief for the authorizing official. And it's important to note that we still need to meet RMF and FSMA requirements, but there's latitude in how we do that. And with fast track ATO, chances are you're going to have a lot of those traditional RMF components there. The system security plan, the architecture diagrams, maybe the control matrix, certainly the security assessment report, as well as POAMs if they're necessary. Are there any more questions on fast track ATO?
One, just to be crystal clear, it sounds like a garbage in, garbage out situation. So you really have to have a solid foundation in your accredited environment to begin with.
Yes.
To be able to make that leap to, say, a cloud environment or whatnot, and achieve the ATO in this, using this process in the timeframes you're talking about.
Right, because if it's garbage going into the CSP, we'll find it when we do the penetration test. Whether it's the vulnerabilities or we crash the system, hopefully in test or dev, not in prod, we'll see it. We'll also see it. Our engineers, when they're talking to the system owners, the administrators, the developers, they're in their minds doing their own sort of assessment. They're also looking at, we'll request like network diagrams and architectural diagrams, and our engineers will be doing kind of just what's the quality look like here? How do we think this pen test is going to go based on what we're seeing just going into the environment?
Okay, thank you.
So continuous ATO. With continuous ATO, we really wanted to make sure that bringing a system and applying security to a system was a value add activity. we did not want it to, we wanted to get away from the checkbox exercise or security in the form of paperwork, which isn't really security. We really wanted to make sure that, yes, this system truly is secure. It's maybe even more so based on, as compared to traditional processes, because through a couple of different techniques I'm going to get into, we really wanted to focus on, actual live security. So, like I said earlier, the way Darkwolf sort of views a software factory, if you will, we view the software factory as being composed of the people, the processes, and the technology. Those three things taken together. That's what we're accrediting. Traditional ATO is really only accrediting the system, really. But when we accredit the factory, we're looking not just at technology factors, but also at cultural factors and process factors, and really trying to get a holistic assessment. We also want to bake security into the entire software development lifecycle. So with the goal of DevOps security being, shift security left, that's certainly a driving factor behind the idea of continuous ATO. And again, the authority for this, because I was an IT auditor in when I first started my career, this is NIST 800-37 revision 2 certainly provides the authority to go this route. And so that's another question that we may have to address with authorizing officials. Is this allowed by NIST? And the answer is yes, and we can point to this reference document.
Hey, Tom, you keep talking about the people, the technology, and the processes. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people here are pretty forward-leaning and look out mm-hmm. and understand the technology pieces. There's a ton of information out there in public sources about mm-hmm. processes. Can you talk a little bit more about the people aspect and what you're looking at whenever you perform an assessment like this?
Yep. So when we get to the last slide, actually, the Platform 1 accreditation, and that's public now, it got posted to LinkedIn. When we look at the people, we will actually, pre-COVID, we're working on how to do this now virtually, but I think there's ways to do it. We make, our engineers and our pen testers will go and sit side by side with the engineers. They'll look at how requirements are being put together or even initial storyboards. Security should always be part of that conversation from the very first. The user desires X. What is the security ramification? There should also be a corresponding discussion, at that time, what is the security ramification here? And our developers will assess that. Then they'll also assess what are the practices going on within the software factory. So for example, they'll attempt to hack into the Wi-Fi network. One of the things that's interesting with the Air Force's approach to DevSecOps is that they recognize a lot of engineers, especially those who are forward-leaning and are coming out of, the tech companies or that culture, may not want to work in an old, stuffy government building on a military base that's isolated 10 miles out of town. So the Air Force, with Kessel Run, with Platform 1, Bespin, they've actually rented rework-type spaces in downtown metropolitan areas that are gorgeous. The Kessel Run facility in Boston is on the top floor of a skyscraper, beautiful view of the entire skyline. It's a WeWork facility, so it's got free coffee, free beer, free food, and just wonderful place to work. What's interesting about that is that they don't necessarily have military-grade installation protections. However, there need to be some mitigations in place. So our engineers will look at, is the Wi-Fi secure? Are engineers thinking just in those general terms, or can I just jump onto the Wi-Fi? So we've done the war driving where we parked a car outside and we're able to jump onto the Wi-Fi network of the software factory. We had to patch that. We'll also look at, is security education a regular part of the process? Is security baked into the testing process? And I'll also get into another story about one of the factories that we work with and kind of an issue that they had. But that's part of how our engineers will come in and literally sit side by side with the developer engineers, the DevOps engineers, and assess, are they following secure processes? So especially if they're doing extreme programming like paired programming and things of that nature, is security a part of those conversations?
Great, thank you.
So this software, picture sort of gets into what Dark Wolf's view of a software factory is. And we see the software factory as being fundamental to the continuous ATO approach. Without a well-built and running software factory, you can't really have continuous ATO. It's not going to work. So with that perspective, I think, again, forward-leaning, industry-leading personnel who believe in the DevOps approach, the use of the modern tools, and the programming techniques, that's critical, and who are passionate about what they're doing. That's what strikes me with the meetup groups such as this one and the other meetup groups that I've spoken with, as well as our teams who are at these sites. And when I visited these sites, those folks are passionate about what they do. And I think that's critical. The second piece, best in breed technology. And that's, again, keeping up with technology, modern tools, tuning the pipeline, and using best in breed software. DevOps best practices, we expect to see those for version control, use of open source software, managed patching, red teaming, like we talked about earlier. Secure DevOps, we'll look at cultural assessments, make sure they're keeping up with patches. We have a red team at some of the software factories constantly beating up the software factory, integrated tool sets, things of that nature. And then part 5 of this, what's critical, I think, to DevSecOps in the Air Force and Dark Wolf view, as well as the continuous ATO, is just constant improvement, constant, how can we do this better? And then validating what you're doing. This is definitely a cyclical process. And so that's also part of that personnel security assessment. Are they constantly trying to improve how they do security, how they do programming, and how they view these things? Just to briefly talk about this, and we almost touched on in one of the questions, but especially for fast track ATO, one of the things we certainly encourage to help the continuous ATO process or fast track ATO is using pre-authorized, infrastructure and platform components. The more controls that you can inherit and the more approvals that you can inherit, the better. And this is definitely something that we encourage rather than bake your own. And the term I heard this morning was couture software. I thought that was funny. I had not heard that before. Couture software is discouraged. So, and I think that this is definitely an emphasis for continuous and fast track ATO as well as for DevSecOps. What's fascinating about Platform One is that their moonshot was to build their entire stack using open source software, which they have done very successfully. But by using open source software, also using things like Cloud One and other already approved components, you reduce the level of effort that an application or a pipeline needs to get to and maintain its ATO. So it can get a little complex, but at the same time, the more you can inherit, the better, especially if you are a vendor looking to deploy a product to the government using the government's pipeline. You could either bake your own out in Amazon Web Services, just commercial services, or use Amazon GovCloud. We would recommend you use Amazon GovCloud every single time. This is a very high level view of the continuous ATO approach. And this was taken directly from the playbook that's posted to the website now. And so the playbook gives a little more context around this. But just to point this out, the 3 middle arrows of the chevron, or the 3 middle chevrons, that's taken from, sort of traditional RMF. The outer 2 chevrons, especially continuous improvement and validation, is specific to continuous ATO. And this is kind of our view of pre-authorizing the system, making sure that you have a good design in place, getting to an initial authorization, and then ongoing authorizations, reauthorization, and continuous improvement. And with continuous improvement, we really rely on cybersecurity, the red team, the adversarial assessments, and the penetration testing to make sure that the pipeline and the environment and the infrastructure is staying secure, as well as periodic pen testing of the applications or pen testing applications on a sampling basis. So just to briefly get into some continuous ATO best practices, and one bullet here that we've certainly covered quite a bit. Every authorizing official is different. Luckily, most of the authorizing officials that we have interacted, I would say all of them that we've interacted with, are forward-leaning. They know that they see the value of continuous ATO, they see the value of fast-track ATO, and they're comfortable that security is there, especially based on the results of the penetration testing reports that we provide. And so working with the authorizing official, as well as developing a relationship with the authorizing official, we believe is crucial for getting through this process. Once you get below the authorizing official, if you go down one step in the org chart, if you will, there's different structures that I think also would benefit to have relationships with those folks. At the Air Force and other DoD organizations, you have security control assessors who report to the AOs. They may have contractors working for them called security control assessors representatives. You have ISOs, ISMs, and other folks responsible for security. I think it's important to get them all on the same page as much as you can. And what we have found is that it's typically the AOs and the security controller assessors who are the most forward-leaning. And then it's the ISOs and ISMs who tend to be a little more conservative. But again, what we try to do is prove security through penetration testing. So it's one size doesn't fit all, and like we said earlier, look for reciprocity opportunities as well as for opportunities to inherit controls and inherit control authorizations. Just a quick note on continuous monitoring, because I don't want to miss it. So what we're also doing, especially at Platform 1, is really focusing on zero trust models. So giving the absolute, it's deny all by default, and then what minimum access do people, tools, and processes need to get their job done. And that's part of our, repeated looking at these platforms and part of our red team testing. And one of the things we actually came across at another software factory was that we found that the software factory was allowing deployments to proceed after SonarQube failures. So the deployments were going into production with vulnerabilities. We found that through our red team testing. The engineering team went back, reconfigured SonarQube across all the pipelines, and so now a deployment is stopped if it has a SonarQube failure. Just examples like that of making sure that anything is wrong with that software, do not trust it, fail it, and go back and take another look at it. Because I talked so much about it, and it's near and dear to our hearts, the role of penetration testing, this slide is just a high-level overview of Darkwolf's process towards a penetration test, whether it's for fast-track ATO, continuous ATO, traditional ATO, or if we're doing a penetration test for a commercial customer to meet one of their regulatory needs, or they're curious about what the security of their system looks like. We really follow a three-phased approach. On average, and it can vary depending on the size and scope of the system, most of our penetration tests take about 4 weeks. It's typically a week of reconnaissance, a week of vulnerability scanning, and most of those scans, we just kick them off and let them roll. Then a week of exploitation attempts, and then a week of compiling our report and getting a draft over to the customer. We launch most of our penetration tests now from our home. We VPN through our corporate IP address, and then from there, launch our scans and our attacks. We typically use, we let the customer know what our IP address is going to be so that it's whitelisted. We do a combination of black box testing, white box testing, gray box testing, whatever the customer feels would best benefit, their security requirements. But, the first phase is really just gathering information, talking to the systems teams, getting documentation if they have it, maybe doing a little bit of scanning or maybe some public reconnaissance to see what we can learn about the system publicly. Second phase, execute and iterate testing. So we're running our scans, we're seeing vulnerabilities, cross-referencing those to CVEs, attempting exploits. We really try, and it's gotten a little difficult in COVID, but we're hopefully getting better at it, making sure our testers are talking to each other, they know what they're seeing, they can see what they're seeing, exchange experiences and things like that, so that we can really, have an effective test against our targets. And then we go into reporting. And with reporting, we provide an executive summary. Depending on the executive, sometimes it's an executive sentence. Yes, the system is secure. You can approve it. Or no, please don't approve this until they've done X, Y, and Z. So, and then we'll go into more detail, and we'll go vulnerability by vulnerability. We'll provide screenshots of the vulnerability and how we found it, how we exploited it, and what the suggested remediation is. And we'll do this, for enterprise software, systems, infrastructure. We've done mobile devices, and then then we're applying a similar framework to some social engineering testing that we're doing. So just my last slide to kind of pull it all together to start our case study. And again, the Air Force published this to LinkedIn, so I'm happy to talk about it here. But at Space Camp, which became Platform One, we deployed testers to Colorado Springs to hunt for vulnerabilities. These were the guys who, they went out, they looked at the wireless. They were in the Platform One prior to COVID was in it was called the Catalyst Campus. It was basically a WeWork type space in downtown Colorado Springs, nice space. And so they did the traditional penetration testing, they did the cultural assessment, they looked at the environment, and we did our tests, we issued some reports. What we do also is when we see vulnerabilities and issues, we don't wait on those and play the gotcha game. Our engineers will just let you know, here's what we found, so that their teams can go in and fix it. Or we'll say, here's what we found. Can you wait on fixing it? Because we think we might be able to use this as a jumping off point to something else. And we found that security administrators will typically say, okay, hurry up, but all right, go ahead and try it. If something's bad enough, then, it didn't happen here, but we have seen in other cases where systems have been pulled offline for immediate reconfiguration and then brought back online, and our testers tested it again to make sure the vulnerability was truly closed. But this effort was nice. It was the penetration testing effort that resulted in the continuous ATO of what was Space Camp. It's now transferred to Platform One, and we have a couple of teams at Platform one of which is the red team that, again, is just continuously beating up on the system. And that's it. So again, thank you for having me. I hope this has been helpful. The continuous ATO playbook goes into a lot more detail. One thing I missed, and I apologize, with that continuous ATO playbook, we talked earlier about all those NIST RMF artifacts, the system security plan, the controls matrix, the, whatever the case might be. We've actually found situations where with a forward-leaning authorizing official who's really going to put a lot of emphasis on actual security of like the penetration test as opposed to the, all of the RMF artifacts, most software factories customize the playbook to their environment and their factory. And we've seen that as a very popular practice. We can help them do that, and we can also assess them against, if you will, to make sure that they're adhering to the playbook that they wrote, which will give the authorizing official confidence that they're maintaining the security posture that was approved.
Can I ask you a couple questions then?
Sure.
You had the chart you had that really focused in on the process of continuous ATO. You talked about the continuous improvement, mm-hmm. And there was a piece there that I see as a challenge for really almost for our industry and how we build programs and contracts. The improvement areas, in particular in people, where you talked about the criticality of the evaluate, recruit, and train. Mm-hmm. We tend to have very specialized people in a lot of instances. They tend to work in the same job in the same program for a decade or more. Mm-hmm. But there's not really the opportunity or incentive to drive training, to drive the new understanding, the new practices, the new tools. Have you seen in all the teams that you worked with, have you seen good strategies to create the culture that you referred to earlier to really help drive these areas of improvement?
Yeah, just a couple of things kind of in that question that struck me. One is, in some cases, there's low motivation for folks to learn new skills, and we have seen that. Culture at the Air Force software factories especially is critical, and they are always out to protect their culture to the point where, so there's there's positive and maybe necessary ways to help enforce that. And so the positive ways are, there's a lot of team building and camaraderie. There's the daily stand-ups, where kudos are offered, training opportunities are made available, there's team building. And what we found is that a lot of the people who we hire already have some DevOps engineering skills on their resume. And at first that was very difficult to find. It's getting a little less so, but it's still a bit of a challenge, but those folks who are willing to learn. We're also cognizant that some developers will be new to DevSecOps, new to the tools and new to the processes, but they want a new start. And so we're willing to give them, in some cases, we're willing to, bring if the environment will work with it, bring them on in a junior position so that they can begin to skill up and learn this sort of new way of doing business. In other ways, maybe the necessary ways, we have also seen where folks, there were personnel who just, they weren't quite getting it. It wasn't a good fit for them. And so we'll typically reassign them to another project. And we've seen that happen before as well. So, or maybe a project where maybe that's not as fast paced, or to give them more time to kind of, to get up to speed with this way of doing business. At Dark Wolf, for training purposes, we have a couple of different things we do. We partner with other vendors, including a very well-known web services company, and they will provide training on their tools and technologies to our employees, typically for free as a way to try out and demo their products. But what's nice about that is our employees get access to these new tools such that even if they're not using them on site today, if their customers ask them about them, they've had some hands-on experience. So one example was some Kubernetes training where all of our engineers built and deployed Kubernetes clusters within a day. Another thing that we do are monthly hacking challenges. And unfortunately, these aren't quite as disciplined about it during COVID as we were. We do need to get back to it. We're also going through an office move and a few other things. But, with our monthly hacking challenges, we'll give our employees a problem. So in one case, we did a beer rating application. We also had them build Facebook for company employees' pets, but we asked them to do that using specific tools, typically a newer tool or a tool that's, we feel is going to grow in the market so that our employees get hands-on experience with that. And then we're also happy to send our employees to conferences. So there's KubeCon, we had a couple of folks go to that last year. From the cybersecurity side, we compete at DEF CON and B-Sides and ShmooCon. So I think that in addition to the people, in my own observation, there's also needs to be a support and encouragement from the company to learn these new tools, to learn DevOps and to learn these tools and to keep up with these tools. And at Dark Wolf, that's one thing that we definitely work hard on, is making sure that we give our employees training and opportunity to use these technologies, even if they're not using them in the field today.
Okay, thanks. I was also curious, as a program who's looking forward to some new requirements that include the establishment of a software factory, do you have any maybe some stories you can tell about teams you've worked with and what they've gone through as they built their software factory? Any lessons learned or critical hurdles that were necessary to overcome that our community should look out for?
It's funny you bring that up. I personally, unfortunately, have not, but I'm about to if certain bids go our way. So I'm just trying to think of stories that I've heard from other software factories. I think one thing that's critical is continuous security assessments. In the name of speed and innovation, sometimes security can take a back seat. And a lesson learned there is that developers may be given too much access in production to get things done, or the discipline that was authorized does not remain. And we have seen that slip in the past and result in security incidents. So that is one lesson learned. Another lesson learned is that as the software factory is standing up, there may be a lot of naysayers who want to see it not succeed or fail. They just think it's, this agile or waterfallish, agile-ish, is the way to go. That DevSecOps is just too risky. And I think that what's interesting is that there's the belief that you need a firm set of requirements. They have to be tested and tested and tested and tested, and then it can deploy to production. That way you minimize the chance of a system going down accidentally. But that's the opposite philosophy of Google, Netflix, Facebook, they maintain their uptime because they are constantly releasing fixes to production and they are following DevSecOps. So those are two lessons learned that I've definitely, stories that I've heard that hopefully those are helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Let me ask you about the life cycle. And I look at I assume you're familiar with the systems engineering V
Yes.
that so many of our programs operate under. And one of the big challenges that I see is, DevOps taken from the commercial world and DevSecOps seems to be so focused on the activities of development, test, release, and now the incorporation of security in that process.
Mm-hmm.
But we have there's a huge footprint of systems engineering that almost isn't addressed in these processes. Have you seen examples of how to effectively incorporate systems engineering in these processes?
Oh my goodness. Let me give me 1 second to think about that. I apologize. I don't have a good answer for that question, but I'm happy to go back and talk to some of our teams and see.
Well, don't feel bad, because I asked that question to Gene Kim and he didn't know either. So you're in really outstanding company there.
Oh, good.
So I think this is a good opportunity. We're about at our hour, if you count when we really started, to sort of open it up. If anybody would like to either just ask Tom a question about continuous ATO, fast track ATO, what they do with penetration testing and working with software factories, or if you want to type something into the chat, I'll be happy to convey that. So let's open it up to anybody who would be interested.
Yeah, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned training in particular. So I consider myself to be a software expert, but I'm still coming up to speed on a lot of this stuff as well. And so I have to imagine that many others across our enterprise are in a similar situation. So in particular, I'd like to make sure that our security folks have a baseline understanding of some of these new tools and techniques, the processes available. Do you have any recommendations for where to find appropriate training for those folks so that we can help them understand what we're trying to do, and what we're trying to do is will actually expedite us achieving the desired security posture?
So is the question kind of appropriate training for security folks supporting DevSecOps operations?
Yes, that and cloud and continuous ATO. My experience is, I think, similar to yours. The security folks, especially the AOs and ISOs, they tend to be conservative. They look for some of the lower risk opportunities. However, I want to communicate to them that these things actually don't increase the risk, and in fact, they can help us achieve all of the things on their wish list more rapidly, so that we can actually help the system achieve what they're trying to accomplish.
Yep. So there's not, Dev security ops is definitely a Air Force or DoD construct. It's definitely DevOps everywhere else for the most part. And so I think the Air Force has probably put out the most information to date in terms, and I can't think of other good, and there might be out there, and I'm happy to go do some research, but I think, like, if you look at the Air Force, the Chief Software Officer's website, Nick Shalane, he's put out a lot of good stuff, including the DevSecOps reference model or reference architecture. That has a lot of good information in it for why you would, why this is the right way to go and why DevOps is the right way to go, as well as the continuous ATO playbook that's, publicly available. Nick and Ms. Lauren Knopsenberger have both spoken extensively on these topics at different conferences and in different forums. I would encourage you to watch some of their YouTube videos. I don't have any I would recommend offhand necessarily, but I know they're out there. I know that they've done a lot of speaking on the topic. And unfortunately, because the Air Force is really the only one kind of doing this right now, those resources are some of the best. And then companies that help with this, including Dark Wolf, and there's a few other small sort of risk management framework and other security consultancies that are all at the Air Force that are helping with this process as well.
I have a follow-up to that, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I've been communicating with Mr. Shalon a bit as well, and I like a lot of the things he's doing. I'm having difficulty in discerning which parts of those are germane only to the Air Force and authorized in the Air Force, and which ones have kind of a blanket approval at the DoD level and extend to defense-wide agencies in particular. Is there kind of a primer or a manual or something that identifies which things really are approved by DoD CIO for incorporation, or do we just assume that the Air Force solution for software factories is the solution?
For right now, it's probably the best model. I do know that there are DoD level working groups that Mr. Shalon is leading that are working on rolling out to the wider Department of Defense. So I don't know that if anything, I don't think anything has actually been published yet, but there are working groups on DevSecOps, continuous ATO, and things of that nature, where the initiative is to take the best practices from the Air Force and help to create policy for the larger Department of Defense.
Thank you.
Hey, Tom, would you hit the last chart just to build on the idea of training? Nope, keep going. One more. It should be the last chart that I provided around the deck. I just wanted to point out.
There we go.
There is a ton of open resources out there. Some great books that talk about practices. The DevSecOps handbook, I think, is a phenomenal resource. It's very much a handbook. It's not a pleasure read, but it's very good. One person that I really have learned a lot from is John Willis. John actually came and did a talk at our 2-year anniversary in December. It's on our YouTube channel, talks a lot about attestation through the process, and talks a lot about some of the deadly sins that are often incorporated in these processes that have to be avoided. He's got some really good material and discussion. He's now with Red Hat, which puts him in an interesting opportunity to work with the Department of Defense programs and contractors. So there's an opportunity there. I know he's reached out to me and asked if there's anything him and his team can do to help, leverage their experience both in the commercial world and working with major, industry players to help. I think we have resources like that at our disposal if we choose to reach out for them. But there's a ton of really open information. It's amazing to me how many industry, especially commercial industry people, are completely transparent about what they're doing and are happy to share, what would traditionally be the secret sauce, and really help anyone else come along to get these practices, the security resiliency understood and in their systems. So some great material out there. We do try to maintain, good references on our website for the meetup. So if anyone has suggestions about what we could incorporate or add to help members of the community, I'd be more than happy to add that as well.
Totally agree with what you said there, JD. Hey, Tom, this is Sean. I had a question for you. Seems like most of the time, or most of the environments for continuous ATO have been environments where both kind of the platform, the dev environment are all running in like the same hosted cloud environment. Have you had experience at all where you can get continuous ATO where you're deploying or running into disconnected networks, which is often the case in the DoD area?
Yes, so that is a concept that we are working on. We have a project where we are working on a way to sign containers to demonstrate that they have not been tampered with as they cross environments and they cross domains. This is something that our customers are also working with us on. That is an issue that we're working on. Because it involves classified, usually going to classified environments, I can't really get into it here, but that is certainly, we have encountered that, and it's something, a challenge that we are working on.
So,
The goal
so
is
what
to
about what about beyond just the containers themselves, right? Because part of your continuous ATO is about that the platform that I'm running on is safe and secure, right? And so if you're looking at the platform that you're building and testing in, you know, you have to have essentially that same sort of certification on that I can build that same sort of platform in that production environment when I deploy into there and take my secure containers over into that environment.
Right, and so the way that we're addressing that is separate adversarial assessments or separate penetration tests right now. Even if the environments are copies of each other, it's still, right now it's separate penetration tests.
Okay. So little trust but verify still there.
Exactly.
Well, thanks.
Any other questions? Any other topics folks would like to bring up, or experiences that you'd like to share, challenges that you face that that perhaps people in this forum could provide some assistance on?
Gosh, that's a great question. Oh, wow. I had not thought of that. Nothing is jumping to mind, but if something does, I'm happy to circle back and share those with you guys.
I'll throw out maybe a challenge that I see. It really comes down to the question of transition. Certainly in my domain, I see a lot. You know, I got, for a little bit of context and scale, we've got about 650 people on our program, and we work in one of these disconnected environments. And our challenge is, how do we embrace these practices, especially now that they're becoming contract requirements, with a team who's been doing the same job for 15 years. We celebrated 15 years of operational capability recently. And we really have to find a way to get, you know, to turn a 600 person ship to embrace new thought processes and new technologies that they've not dealt with before, right? This isn't going from Red Hat 6 to Red Hat 7. No. This is very different. So how do you get understanding, number one, but how do you get enthusiasm? Because I see this as really exciting, and I haven't cracked the code on getting the excitement that I feel to propagate through an organization of that size.
It's so funny you should mention this. We're actually, one of our contract tasks is exactly that: communication, change management, strategic communications, process improvement. So, and I partially ruined my technology background when I became a management consultant for a few years. So, but that said, you know, it's a big undertaking, especially I haven't seen it at that scale yet of 600 people. You know, I think the model to look at here potentially is Kessel Run at the Air Force. They were the first. Their founding member, Colonel Odie, recently retired. You know, but they were dealing with the same challenge. They had a lot of naysayers, a lot of people who didn't believe in it. I think that it's everything from contract requirements, for one. If the contract says you have to do it, you better do it. But I think two, though, it's like just showing, you know, the advantages of the you know, how the relationship to mission of more of the frequent releases to production, putting capability to the warfighter or to whoever needs it out there, you know, such that you're keeping pace with the adversary. I think it's learning new skills. For you personally, or, you know, anyone personally, you're learning some of the most modern development and deployment techniques that are out there. I mean, that's good for anyone's resume, frankly. It's showing them the personal benefits. Absolutely, I think the Air Force is one of the models for leadership support. Everyone from, you know, Dr. Roper, Mr. Shalane, Ms. Knossenberger, and I'm forgetting the other deputy CIO's name at the moment, but they were all big proponents of this. So at the program level, it's really government leadership. You know, this is what we want, and having that, I think, setting that tone to help steer the ship. I think there will probably always be naysayers or folks who don't believe in it or who don't want to go in that direction. But I think that there's a couple of things. It's that kind of that traditional, leadership buy-in and very visible and vocal leadership support, communication on down that, leadership, so everyone understands that this is the direction we want to go, making training resources available, publishing lists such as these DevOps resources for folks to read who do want to learn more about it. Probably also singling out those folks who do want to go, identifying somebody steps forward, hey, I really want to learn how to do this, and bringing them up, bringing them forward and letting them help to lead that initiative and that effort. So those are just a few things in mind. I think at the Air Force, though, leadership buy-in and very vocal leadership support was a huge reason. Demonstrated success as well with the tanker refueling scheduling system that they built, as well as folks just being enthusiastic and showing their enthusiasm and their passion for going this direction would be a few of my thoughts, but I have not seen this for like a 600-person program turn in this direction yet.
Okay,
if I may, I can offer a couple of quick thoughts. The first is that that sounds like a traditional change process or change leadership problem. So the school pick answer is Cotter's change model, but similar to what Tom was saying, he mentioned Dr. Roper. So it's good to have high-level advocacy and then build a coalition of people who people on the team can relate to, and then there's a peer pressure sort of thing, or just a familiarity that goes along with that. But in addition, a lot of the folks who are effectively creating the future, even if they kind of day to day, they're creating new stuff, and so those folks tend to like a big challenge, and so could entice them, cast it as something that is new, it's exciting, it's a challenge that still much of the DoD hasn't accomplished yet, and even make a contest out of it, giving M&Ms for the people who accomplish certain things the first time. It actually works, and I've seen it work for security as well. Just a couple of quick thoughts there.
Yeah, absolutely.
great, thanks. So I think that's a great place to end our meetup. I'll open up for any last go backs.
Great presentation, Tom. Appreciate your time, and thanks for walking through this. It's good stuff.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Absolutely. It's great to see such an excited group, who wants to move forward and who's advocating for this sort of, way of software development and this way of deploying capabilities. I think that's great. It's critical.
All right. With that, Tom, I'd like to extend my thanks as well. Thanks for letting us publish or making sure we could legally publish your playbook. I think that's a really good read, and I'd recommend everyone to go pull down a copy. Also, thanks for letting us publish your charts. So for everyone who might be interested, I will be publishing these charts into our open source repository. You have access to them, and you can pull them down and use them to help train and encourage your programs and your teams to improve and adopt new practices. And if I'm sure Tom, his information is published in that in the document that the Air Force's continuous ATO playbook. That's exactly how I reached out and contacted him. I would, number one, thank you for being so responsive, and thank you for being so open and willing to support our community here. And I'm sure others could benefit from your help as well.
Yep, absolutely. My pleasure. Please definitely feel free to reach out. Absolutely.
Okay. With that, thanks everyone. And hopefully we will see you next month. Have a great weekend.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.